Dobson is a fighter that I didn't have too much of a clue about before he was sort of matched up against Conor Benn, and I know Conor was calling for the names like Jaron Ennis and obviously Chris Eubank Jr. as well, and I think he will be a little disappointed in some ways that this is the fight that has fallen to him, and I think that's probably a feeling that's shared with boxing fans, probably the media, and probably in some ways the promoters themselves. They would have hoped that we could get a little bit of a more of a name in the opposite corner to Conor Benn, but it is Dobson, and he will present some challenges. But what are we going to learn from this fight if Conor Benn wins? Not much, in my opinion. We've seen him in with plenty of reasonable names and blow them away in pretty quick fashion. The only one thing that we may learn is if he loses, and to be honest, that's not something that I can see happening. So I expect Conor Benn to get past Dobson in convincing fashion and move on to the next, and hopefully the next is a fight that we can have a bit more interest in over here.
Ronnie Mode is saying the way Dobson is talking in that promo material, considering himself the best in the world, is laughable. Apparently, he just hasn't been treated fairly in the rankings. Well, mate, stopped being inactive for years then. And they said they want Benn out in April again, supposedly against another unknown. How long will fans still care about Benn? And that's the point there that draws a bit of merit, because Conor Benn is a British fighter. He has to fight over in the UK right now because he can't get a license right now. The British Border Control won't license him. As it stands, and that's in flux as they look to head towards a date where that will be in discussion. But they won't go another route. Maybe the PBA was potentially on the line there, but they haven't gone that route for now. They're going abroad. So he has to kind of fight there for now. And he's a British fighter, and I think they're accommodating to a degree to make sure that British fight fans can, if they have that interest in Benn, can watch him at a time which appeases them when usually fights happen over in the US. I know the US love it, but we don't, because we have to stay up till 3-4 a.m. to watch fights. But that's been accommodated in the sense that British fight fans can watch him. And that kind of gives you the notion that they understand as well, too, that we've got to make a change here so that people in the UK don't lose sight of Conor Benn. People in the UK, from their perspective, talking a lot about Conor Benn and the drugs issues. What about the fighting sense? He's got to get the eyes and to see him in the ring, as opposed to just the discussion around him and outside of the ring. So they've obviously made that indication to change the times there, so fight fans can watch him fight this weekend. But in terms of discussion of him as a fighter, look, I think he'll come through this fight against Pete Dobson. I know a couple of people in the industry are kind of looking at the upset, but I'm a little bit disappointed in terms of the opponent. Bearing in mind the likes of, the conversation that's been had, the likes of calling out and wanting to fight Mario Barrios, who's on the ascendancy, the David Avanesian fight, talk about David Avanesian, and no one knows David Avanesian, but no one knows Pete Dobson. So, how have we ended up here? Josh Taylor was someone who had a bit back and forth, I believe, with Conor Benn. Jaron Boots Ennis, someone who was talked about as well. Harry Scarf, British title holder. Could that be held for maybe the 5 versus 5? Harry Scarf last featuring on a Queensbury card. I believe it was the Magnificent 7 where he beat Echo Esselman. But those type of fights, which kind of bring the excitement, bring kind of the scope and on Conor Benn, are the fights that we want to see here. Obviously, the talk about Chris Eubank Jr. fighting, whether that happens later on this year as well too, if Ben can get that green light on it, is another thing just to discuss. But it does stand to be a little bit underwhelming as to the opposition that Conor Benn is fighting this weekend. What about potential fights this year for Ben, Josh? Are any of those names that I mentioned excite you? Do you think they'll revisit the Eubank Jr. fight? Kell Brook is someone that Conor Benn wants as well too. Are there any names that you really want to see Conor Benn in with this year?
I think Eubank Jr. is the one that captures the interest still. I think when you speak to people about Conor Benn, the name that they're always going to link him with until the fight happens is going to be Chris Eubank Jr. I mean, from a boxing fan's point of view, Jaron Ennis is a terrific fight, and one that would really capture the interest of boxing fans. But from a casual point of view, the only way forward really is that Eubank Jr. fight. And I think the commercial value that both of those fighters have got does make it a huge fight over here. And that's the thing, really. If that fight's going to happen, it's got to be over here. It's not really viable over in the US. It might be viable over in Saudi in terms of the money that they can offer, but in terms of the interest and the fans inside the arena, they're not going to get anywhere near the amount that they could get here. They're talking about obviously filling a stadium, whether that's down in Cardiff or at Wembley or at Tottenham. So that's the fight I want to see. I certainly don't want to see the Kell Brook fight. Been out of the ring a couple of years. I don't think it's particularly sensible for him to step back in the ring. I know he's talked about a fight with Chris Eubank Jr. as well, but that's not something I'd be particularly interested in seeing.
It's also as well like what weight is he gonna settle down back at? Traditionally, he's been at welterweight, but his last fight out was at super welter. I believe this one's back at welterweight. But with the Eubank Jr. fight, they were looking at a catch weight there. So, what direction is he going to? A welterweight usually traditionally ends up potentially at middleweight, so that might be in the future. But that doesn't seem still, future middleweight. That seems still quite a while away, unless it's a big jump to that type of fight against Chris Eubank Jr. But it feels like he's got that juice in him left to fight at, and by juice I don't mean that, but bad choice of words potentially, but it seems like he's got life is a better word to use. It seems like he's still got life at welterweight. So does he want to stay here? Will he mix it back up at super welterweight as he did in his last fight? So those are kind of the discussions. Will the power hold? It didn't against Orozco, who was as well, forget to mention as well, he ended up popping after that fight too as well. But does the Conor Benn attributes and assets, do they translate over to at higher divisions as well? That he's got to kind of realize and go forward to stick at the division that he wants to, and it seems to be welterweight, but does that bring up different fights for him? Let's get to some discussion in the chat there on the Benn versus Dobson fight. We have here Jamala Love saying Benn will KO Dobson and Eddie and Gad will tell us he's ready for Crawford. Well, he's got to KO Dobson first, but I don't think any boxing fan will take that serious. Would they probably take a fight with Crawford? Sure, I imagine so. Why wouldn't they? But no boxing fan, although Eddie can sell ice to Eskimos and Conor does also promote himself well, I don't think they'll be buying that one. And with Conor not being a big welterweight, are they waiting for Boots to outgrow the division? Yeah, I mean, that seems to be potentially a call there, but they've also, it's one of those things where that might be happening, but they're also actively calling out, so attaching the name to them as the rise, and that kind of makes you want to go for that fight. And then also, when Boots Ennis is apparently a free agent and Matchroom are looking to do a deal with him, does that make that fight closer? Is the negotiations going on behind the scenes? That's something that will play out in the future. But it seems like to some degree that might be a possibility, that fight happening. But he's got to get over the line. How much does Lee Wood weigh? Is Wood versus Benn viable? No, I don't think so. I think that's what's Lee at. Super feather now? So I don't think it's not a fight certainly I want to see either way. Lee Wood versus Conor Benn. I think I'd love to see Lee Wood versus the likes of Josh Warrington, versus the likes of Tony Sims, stablemate with Conor Benn, Joe Cordina. Those type of fights are the types of fights I'd like to see Lee Wood in with, not with Conor Benn as of now. But interesting off the field, left field indeed choice there.